Observing Children's Sabbath may be new to some of you. For the past 22 years, Marion Wright Edelman, president of the Children's Defense Fund, has sought to unite congregations of all faiths in shared concern for children. Through a national weekend of advocacy and action, congregations like this one across the country are showing their common commitment to improving the lives of children and working for justice on their behalf. Each year, there is a theme. This year, the theme is beating swords into plowshares, ending the violence of guns and child poverty. Now, ending poverty is always at the center of the Children's Defense Fund's work and the mission of the Children's Sabbath. We know that the lack of economic opportunity for families undercuts the health and well-being of children. This year, the other focus is gun violence. Together, poverty and gun violence have torn through families, shattered communities, and raised the level of fear and despair in our society. While school shootings, like the one in Newtown, Connecticut, get most of the attention, daily gun violence among teens and children continues at an alarming pace. In 2010, 18,270 children and teens died or were injured from guns. One child or teen dies from a gun every 3 hours in this country. Over the past 50 years, 3 times more children and teens have died due to gun violence than U.S. soldiers killed in action during the same time. The U.S. has 10 times more gun deaths among children and teens than other first world countries. 1 in 5 teenagers have witnessed a shooting. Black children and teens are almost 5 times more likely to die from guns than whites, and 8.5 times more likely to be injured by guns. These statistics are a lot to hold. Following the school shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary in Newtown, Connecticut last December, most of us expected harsher limits on the availability of guns, especially assault weapons. But while some tweaking of gun permits occurred, and some states have adopted limits on assault weapons, more comprehensive attempts at gun control have failed. John Oliver from The Daily Show summed up our dismay at this failure by saying, quote, "One failed attempt at a shoe bomb and we take off our shoes at the airport. 31 school shootings since Columbine, and there's no change in our regulation of guns." In fact, in some places, the response to these horrific events is to promote more gun use. South Dakota signed a law allowing teachers and volunteers to carry guns to school. Last April, the City Council in Nelson, Georgia, enacted a law requiring every head of household to own a gun and ammunition. Similar laws were proposed in communities in Maine and Utah this year. These policies are motivated by fear and the belief that guns deter violence and promote safety. We are at a stalemate, it seems, over the issue of gun control. And while politicians and lobbyists are stuck, the violence continues. In the face of these facts, these statistics, the reality in our communities, and this challenge of trying to change our gun culture, it is understandably easy to lose heart. We lose heart each time we hear a story of gun violence, especially one involving children. We lose heart when cries for justice go unanswered. Vulnerable communities, especially communities of people of color, lose heart when violence in their community is ignored. We lose heart when our God seems unresponsive. Jesus offers up the parable of the widow and the unjust judge in an attempt to give voice to a community who felt its cries for justice were being ignored. In it, you have this judge who feels accountable to no one, neither fearing God nor respecting anyone. We understand from his avoidance of the widow that his justice is probably arbitrary, self-serving, maybe even dangerous. He reflects the frustration of a community who felt like its claims went unheard by God or the justice system of the day. Perhaps they felt like the families of Trayvon Martin or Oscar Grant. The widow overcame her frustration, returning somehow again and again and again to the judge. Widows are some of the most vulnerable and powerless in Jesus' times, and as such, we know she doesn't have much of a chance at changing a judge's mind. But finally, after who knows how many times of asking, he grants her justice. And then, just to be clear about his motives, Jesus says he gives in so that she may not wear me out. Jesus emphasizes the importance of her persistence in seeking justice. His parable makes the point that if an unjust judge can finally be persuaded to grant justice, how much more likely will a just and loving God grant justice? Jesus encourages his followers to not lose heart, to keep pointing out injustice, and to not stop until justice is granted. Sometimes easier said than done. This week I was at the Minnesota Conference of the United Church of Christ Fall Convocation in Buffalo. One of the keynote speakers was Ann Poston, the Director of Communications for our denomination, and she was helping us think about how to communicate our church's commitment to justice to the wider community. She told us about an African proverb that translates roughly, until the lion has his or her own storyteller, the hunter will always have the best part of the story. Until the lion has his or her own storyteller, the hunter will always have the best part of the story. The proverb reminds us that who tells the story determines how the story is told. Perhaps it made a difference that it was the widow asking for justice and not some advocate. Power for change is generated when we hear stories from people directly affected by issues. The truth of their experience evokes compassion and inspires new thinking. Ann Poston suggested that our call is to help the lions tell their story, to make sure the widows tell their story, to make sure the Trayvon Martins tell their story, to make sure the families of Sandy Hook Elementary tell their story, to make sure the families in our community tell their stories as well. We have to get the guns off the streets, pleaded Movita Johnson Harrell at the Circle of Hope congregation in Philadelphia. In a case of mistaken identity, her 18-year-old son, Charles Johnson, was shot in his car as he waited for his sister. Every day I think of my son, and all I want to do is kiss him on his cheek, said Johnson Harrell. She shared her story at the second of 21 events in a 3-week gun violence prevention storytelling tour organized by Mennonite Central Committee East Coast. The tour also encouraged advocacy and action, giving audience members concrete steps to take in their own communities, letting the lions tell their story. Without persistent advocacy, fear, not compassion, and love will guide our response to gun violence. A week ago, Satya, who's a second grader, came home from her school in Groveland. She told us about a new drill that they were doing called the lockdown drill, where children practice hiding behind desks while someone would walk the halls. And the point of the drill was to hide behind your desk and be as quiet as you could so that nobody walking down the hall could hear you in your classroom. She wondered who it was that they were hiding from. I tried quickly in my mind to sort through the stories of recent and past school shootings to figure out what I could say. What could I say that wouldn't encourage her fear? So Megan and I said a couple of times, far away, people have come into schools who didn't belong there, and you're practicing how to stay safe in case that ever happened. I was not ready, nor did I think she was ready for the scarier images of gunmen in our schools. And I felt sad that our school system sees the need to do this drill. And I worry that treating it just like a fire drill or a tornado drill creates an expectation in our neighborhood school, normalizing a culture of fear in this community. As people of faith, we know there is an alternative to living in fear. We have something to offer people who are discouraged or frustrated. We have heard and lift up the faithful voices of the prophets like Micah, who have given us new visions of justice, beating swords into plowshares. As followers of Jesus, we have seen that another world is possible through love and compassion. I believe our witness can bring new hope to a movement that is stuck. What if our solidarity may be the only thing that will help those like the widow go and tell their story one more time? Our commitment to faithful, not fearful living may inspire teachers and principals to resist the culture of fear in our schools. Let ours be the voice saying boldly and faithfully to victims, advocates, and our country's leaders, do not lose heart. And let us not ourselves also lose heart in this matter. Seek encouragement from one another and our common call. And on behalf of our children and children everywhere, let us persist in our demand to the end of gun violence. Amen.